Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Fable Forge. If you're new here, I hope you enjoy. Please like and subscribe if you do. If you're returning, you know how this goes. And yeah, guys, without further ado, r/askreddit. What's the scariest thing that you have ever encountered while home alone? So one summer, after all my roommates went back home, I was living alone in a college apartment complex. One night, I decided to go to the bars and then Uber home, a relatively safe college town, and I had done this plenty of times before, and the city is pretty empty in the summer. I stepped out of the Uber and started walking up the stairs to my apartment when two men came down at the same time. My guess is they saw me exit the ride. They approached me and started complimenting me, asking for my number, where I was going. I brushed it off, but really had nowhere else to go other than my apartment since my car keys were in there. So when I reached the door, I was like, "Oh, my boyfriend lives here. He's waiting inside for me." And then one of them said, "No, you don't have a boyfriend. We've seen you alone," which was a major red flag. Like, major. But I had no other choice but to just run inside. Now I know I probably should have called the cops here, but they left me alone, so I left it alone. Well, the next night, I was laying on my couch, directly in front of the front door, watching TV, when I start to hear the door handle rattle. I freak out, and go still and silent. Then I start to hear it get a little bit more forceful, and it sounds like someone is pushing on the door. I tiptoed to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find. Went towards the door to look through the peephole at a distance, and it was the two guys from last night. Now I'm really pretty petite female, so I know I was no match. The two of them started knocking really loud, yelling that I needed to open the door. I ran to the end of the hallway and called 911. They started kicking at the door, and at this point, I was full on shaking, just full of adrenaline, but the operator was keeping me sane. At one point, the knocking and banging stopped for about 5 minutes, and I was able to relax and let the operator know the cops were at the apartment looking for the guys. About 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door, and it was the cops. They let me know that they searched the whole complex before coming over, but couldn't find the two guys, but had similar reports of harassment and break ins in the area from other females and lectured me how I should have reported it sooner. Needless to say, I went home for the rest of the summer and didn't come back until it was time to move out. I was super high cleaning the apartment one day, probably around 1 p.m., so the music was up. I was in my zone. Then someone started slamming on the door. It kept going. I stopped the music, thinking that maybe it was just a neighbor who wanted the music turned down. I didn't feel like answering the door. One, I smoked a fuck ton of weed, so I was in no place to. Two, COVID stopped the music, went quiet, but when aggressive knocking did not stop. So I looked around the peephole. Small girl, a bit bigger than my statue. Never seen her before, and I live in a complex with 6 units. So I know what my neighbors look like. But she keeps knocking. Being stupid, I opened the door. She just stared and asked where John was. I told her I didn't know. There's no John here. She just stood and stared at me, definitely on something. I tell her to try down the hall, since I was thinking there might be one that lives down there. I slowly go to close the door, and she legit shoves her foot in the crack and starts to shove. So I start struggling back. We are both actually wrestling with this door. I just go, "What? Can I help you? I am trying to close the door." She stops and relents a bit and does some weird eye shit and goes, "Oh, okay." Then walks off. Locked them both at that fucker real quick. But yeah, don't open doors to strangers. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. Or, surrounded by forest. The sort of place where you wouldn't get in a car unknown to you mistakenly driving by the highway. Your closest neighbor being across the field from your house, that sort of thing. Our house had 3 floors, of which the first one's backside was underground. It was built on a hill. So there was a staircase around the house, with a door leading outside just behind my second floor bedroom window, which was at the back of the house facing the forest. Nobody rarely used the door to enter the house, as you had to walk up the stairs and behind the house in order to do so. I loved staying up late on my computer and would spend countless nights playing games and chatting with mates until the early hours. I must have been about 12. It was in the middle of summer, so I was incredibly light outside regardless of time. My parents were on a holiday and two of my brothers were not home. I was about to go to sleep, but did a little round the massive house and noticed one of my brother's doors was open. Only when I realized I was home all by myself, and of course took advantage of that rare occasion and browsed his room. Mostly it was just super cool entering his room as he'd tell me often to get lost. Anyways, I got tired and finally went to bed. I soon woke up to what I thought was a loud, slow banging noise. Startled, I sat up in my bed and looked around. It was in the middle of the night. I felt my entire body tense as I sat as still as possible, listening. Perhaps I had dreamt it all up. Then I hear it again, right outside my window, only it was getting louder and faster. I started panicking, remembering that I was home all alone. Now I clearly heard someone moving outside. I gathered all of my courage and sneaked to the window, slowly getting closer to peek through the shutters. My hands were sweating, and all I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat growing faster in my ears. As I carefully moved the shutters aside, I saw a tall, skinny, fully naked man standing there, outside my window, in the forest, behind our house, in the middle of fucking nowhere. I honestly don't even remember my exact reaction, except for almost shitting myself, but only seconds later I heard the dude shouting, insert my name here, "Open the fucking door right now! FFS! Open the fucking door! Are you deaf? Let me in right now!" I recognized that voice. It was my brother. I quickly ran to the door and peeked through the window to make sure it was indeed him before opening it. My brother had apparently managed to sleepwalk and lock himself outside butt naked, only to wake up somewhere in our garden. I guess he must have felt equally as terrified when waking up that night before realizing where he was or what was happening. It was pretty fucking hilarious the next day, for me at least. I was 11 and home alone. I got out the shower to discover my house had been broken into. Teen from down the street and his sister were in the living room ransacking the place. My dad kept one of those glass door gun cabinets at the end of the hall by the bedroom door. I took out the first gun I could grab and yelled at him. Dude turned around with a knife but dropped it and ran when he saw the rifle. Coward shoved his sister down as he bolted back out the door. The girl stayed on the ground screaming as I called the cops. They both got arrested over a pocket full of change the guy had shoved in his hoodie. There was a 90s in Texas, and my mom was more pissed about the broken door and them touching her change jar than anything. I was home alone since my husband was away on deployment. One night I was falling asleep. Both my dog and I heard someone on the porch walking around. My dog flipped out, and I decided to go downstairs. I grabbed my gun out the safe and headed downstairs. About two-thirds of the way down, I saw the man through the front door windows. We locked eyes, and he said, "Let me in." And I told him he needed to leave. Again, "Let me in." I told him he needed to leave and that I was calling the cops. "Let me in." I told him that I had a gun. "So do I." And he lifted his gun up and aimed it at me. I fired my gun through the window but missed him. He ran off. The cops found him a few blocks from my house a little bit later. His gun ended up not being loaded. Still, most terrifying shit ever. I was babysitting a family I was unfamiliar with. My parents knew them and suggested me when they needed their babysitter as I liked having money. I accepted. The kids go to bed and I kill time as one does before smartphones are a thing by reading, I think? Maybe doing homework, but that seems unlikely. Anyways, so I start to hear speaking from another room. Not just speaking, but this low, almost demonic voice speaking to another one. I'm not a religious sort, but when you realize that no, you're just hearing things that are definitely a voice, it's more than a little creepy. Not knowing what was going on, I slowly crept to the doorway of the sitting room, then peeked around the corner. Fucking Furbies, talking to each other, at night, in the dark. Furbies suck. My husband was having a dude's weekend, and I was home alone with our kid. The downstairs neighbors were fighting, nothing new there. When all of a sudden I heard her scream, "Help me, please! God, someone help me!" So loud, I knew she had to run out the kitchen into the back stairwell. She was crying and screaming. Their baby was screaming. Then there were thumps and more yelling. I had already called 911 while they were getting my information, and everything went silent down there. The baby suddenly stopped. Everything was quiet. I told them to hurry. The police arrived, and I had to let them in the building. So much for the anonymous report. And they pounded on the downstairs door for a while with no answer. They tried calling the landlord to get permission to break down the door, but one officer came up to ask me if there was another way in. I showed them the back stairwell and said they were unlikely to have bothered locking the kitchen door. They hadn't, and the officers got in. Nobody home. They came back and asked me again what I've heard, and another officer hung back. The family was finally found in the basement. He said they'd all been down there doing laundry and hadn't heard the police knocking. Bullshit. People down on the block could hear them threatening to break down the door. We'd drawn quite a crowd. She insisted everything was fine, and she and the baby were safe, and sent the police on their way. Nothing they could do if she insists she's safe. I couldn't sleep all night, and there were extra cold to us after that. A few months later, I answered the door to two police officers responding to a report of DV. The downstairs neighbors claimed they'd heard screaming and thumps, and then saw my husband jump in his car and speed away. I was home, alone, still in my nightgown. They could see lots of skin and no visible marks. And my husband had been out the country on business for 3 days. They got in trouble for a false report and moved out later that month. I hope she eventually left him. Growing up, we had a large old mirror with a black wood frame leaning against the wall in our hallway. I was doing some homework in the kitchen, but got up to get something from the living room. The hallway is the connecting room between the two, so I passed through it, picked up whatever I needed in the living room, turned around, and was on my way back, and that old mirror is broken on the floor. It's shattered. Pieces everywhere, as if it had exploded. It was completely fine when I passed it just seconds before. I didn't hear it break. I just kind of walked by it and headed out the kitchen door. It scared the shit out of me. We lived in a maisonette in London. We lived upstairs and a man was downstairs. He came banging on our door one day, screaming that his flat was being flooded from our bathroom and to let him in. Well, I was 14 and my brother was 13, mother was out. He came in and went into the bathroom and did something. I don't know what. He was an adult and we trusted him. Well, mom called the council out and there had never been a leak. No water marks or anything. So mom told us not to let him in again. Next time mom went out, he came banging at the door and we told him what mom said. And he went apeshit. Let me fucking in! Let me fucking in! All the while banging the fuck out the door. God knows why he wanted in. Scary. Was in the shower when I heard a door to my apartment being unlocked. Husband wasn't due back for several hours. Turns out it was the skeevy ass building manager snooping around people's apartments when he thought they were not home. Reported him to the company that owns the building, but nothing ever came up of it. Moved out shortly after. Anyways, guys, that'll be it for today. I hope y'all enjoyed. If y'all did, please like and subscribe. Throw us a comment of how we can improve and what we can do better. I would really appreciate it. Growing channels can be hard, but yeah, I hope y'all enjoy and have a great week.